When was the last time you really looked at a scissor jack? I mean, it seems so simple, right? Just a couple pieces of metal, a screw. But hiding inside this really humble-looking tool is an absolute masterclass in mechanical engineering. It's a whole story of incredible forces, really clever materials, and some very, very careful math. So come on, let's peel back the layers here. How do engineers take a super simple goal, lifting a car, and turn it into a machine where every single piece, every nut and bolt, is precisely calculated for strength and, more importantly, for safety? Every engineering project doesn't start with building something. It starts with a question. What is the actual problem we're trying to solve? For a scissor jack, it all begins with understanding the insane forces it has to deal with. So first, the engineers lay out what they call the givens, the normal load. That's what they expect the jack to lift day to day. In this case, 20,000 newtons. But, and this is crucial, they don't design for that. They add a safety factor of 2. It's basically an engineering promise that this thing can handle twice the stress you'll ever put on it. In this right here, this is a huge deal. From this moment on, every single calculation ignores the car's actual weight. Instead, they use this much, much larger design load, a massive 40,000 newtons. That is the number. That's the number every single part of this jack has to be engineered to survive. All right, so we've got our 40,000 newton target. Now we can start designing the part that does all the heavy lifting. Literally, the power screw. This thing is the heart of the whole machine. It's what turns your simple cranking motion into an incredible lifting force. So the engineering problem becomes pretty direct, right? How in the world do you design a screw that won't just stretch or shear or snap in half under that 40,000 newton load? Well, the answer is in the details, starting with the materials themselves. And the very first decision they make is a really clever one. You'd think, hey, let's just make everything out of the strongest steel possible, right? But the nut that the screw turns inside, that's made of a softer metal, bronze. Why would they do that? Well, because under this kind of insane pressure, 2 steel parts can actually seize up or even weld themselves together. Using bronze prevents that from ever happening, making sure the jack works smoothly every time. Now, to make sure the screw itself is strong enough, engineers use this cool concept called von Mises stress. Just think of it like a single danger score for a part. I mean, in the real world, forces are messy. They're pulling, twisting, and compressing all at once. Von Mises is so useful because it just boils all of that chaos down to one simple number. If your number is below the material's strength, you're golden. If it's higher, the part's gonna fail. And this just shows you the insane level of detail we're talking about. Engineers have to account for everything, even the tiny little holes where pins connect the parts together. You see, any hole in a material concentrates the stress around it, creating a potential weak spot. So they use these complex charts to figure out exactly how much weaker that little hole makes the part, and then they can beef it up to compensate. It's incredible. Okay, so the screw is solid. It's not going to break, but it's pushing on these long scissor arms. And this is where the design challenge gets a little more subtle and a lot more dangerous. It's about more than just brute strength. See, you can make these arms out of the strongest steel on the planet, strong enough to theoretically handle 40,000 newtons, no problem. But that's not enough. There's another, sneakier way they can fail. What if, under all that crushing force, the arms don't actually snap? What if they just suddenly bow out to the side and collapse? Well, that phenomenon has a name. It's called buckling, and you've definitely seen this happen a million times. The best way to picture it is to think about pressing down on a drinking straw. It doesn't get crushed, right? It just suddenly kinks and folds in the middle. That exact same thing can happen to massive steel beams, and it's a catastrophic kind of failure that engineers are terrified of. So, how did the engineers solve it? Well, they went way, way overboard. The calculated safety factor against buckling for these arms isn't 2, it's 11. They're 11 times stronger than they need to be because buckling failure is sudden, it's total, and it gives you 0 warning. That's why they treat it with such extreme caution. All right, the arms are safe from buckling. Now let's look at how the power actually gets to them in the first place. Let's talk about the gears. They are the critical link that transfers all that torque from the screw into the lifting motion. And the strategy here is just brilliant in its simplicity: divide and conquer. Instead of trying to use one single massive gear, this design uses 4 smaller ones to split the load. That immense torque from the power screw gets divided 4 ways, which dramatically reduces the force on any single gear tooth. It just makes the whole system so much tougher. And you guessed it, just like with every other part, designing those gear teeth is a whole science in itself. Engineers use these complex geometry factor charts to figure out the exact shape, the size, and the number of teeth they need to transmit all that force without shearing right off. So after all that math, what's the final verdict on the gears? They have a final safety factor of 2.26. So even with the load split 4 ways, they are still designed to be more than twice as strong as they need to be to handle that 40,000 Newton design load. But here's the thing. All this math, all these forces, all these incredible safety factors, they are completely and totally meaningless if a regular person can't actually use the jack. So the last piece of this engineering puzzle is all about the human factor. So the engineers started with real-world data. A study found that the average adult female's maximum pulse strength is about 244 newtons. And that number becomes the final design constraint. The jack has to be operable by someone with at least that much strength. And the logic from here is just beautifully simple. First, the engineers calculated how much torque it would take to turn that screw under the full design load. That came out to 105 newton meters. Then, knowing the human strength limit is 244 newtons, they could work backward to answer the final critical question. How long does the handle need to be? And the answer they got was a handle that's at least 0.43 meters long, which they just rounded up to a nice, even half meter for the final design. So that handle that comes with your jack, its length isn't random. It's a precisely calculated dimension that bridges the massive gap between a 40,000 Newton machine and the power of a single human arm. So let's step back for a second and just look at the complete picture of this incredible piece of everyday engineering. What looks like just a simple pile of metal is actually a complete system where every single detail is a calculated decision. The bronze in the screw prevents it from seizing up, the thickness of the arms prevents buckling, the 4 gears spread out the load, and the length of the handle makes it all usable. All of it working together to achieve one single goal, safely lifting 20,000 newtons. Really, this is just a perfect example of the hidden world of engineering that is all around us. So the next time you see a simple tool, a can opener, a pair of pliers, or a scissor jack, maybe you'll just pause for a second and wonder, what are the hidden calculations, the clever material choices, and the careful safety decisions that make that simple thing work?